Hey guys, welcome back to Wrestle News 365. Hope everyone is doing very, very well. As always, we have a ton of news stories to get into today, especially concerning the world of Impact Wrestling. And we have a couple of reunions teased, possibly outside of WWE, maybe in Impact Wrestling, by former WWE Superstar Wesley Blake. Now, Wesley Blake, of course, was one of the WWE Superstars released from his contract in April. There's been lots of speculation that he could be one of the names that shows up at Slammiversary next month for Impact Wrestling. Now, in an interview with Sportskeeda, he mentioned that he is giddy with excitement about his future outside of WWE and the opportunities that await him outside of the company. Now, one of the opportunity, shall we say, that awaits him outside of the company could possibly involve a reunion with former NXT Tag Team partner and former NXT Tag Team Championship partner Buddy Murphy. Now, incidentally, Murphy was released from his contract at the end of June, so potentially could we see a reunion between both Buddy Murphy and Wesley Blake outside of WWE, possibly in somewhere like Impact Wrestling? Well, he was asked about this in this interview with Sportskeeda. Now, he was also asked about the possibility of going back to WWE, going to companies like Impact, like AEW, like New Japan, MLW, NWA, all of these kind of places. Now, he did not rule out the possibility of going back to WWE or going back to NXT in the same vein as Samoa Joe just has. Now, he also mentioned places like AEW, Impact Wrestling, New Japan Pro Wrestling, MLW, and NWA as places he wouldn't mind competing in. And, of course, he mentioned a possible reunion with Buddy Murphy outside of WWE. This is what Wesley Blake had to say. Quote, Buddy Murphy is another name that sadly, very talented, got released recently. And I mean, the opportunities of working back with Buddy would be a lot of fun. Now, it was also spoken about the possibility of reuniting with former Forgotten Sons teammate and part of the Knights of the Lone Wolf, remember that faction on SmackDown, Steve Cutler, who of course now is currently signed to Impact Wrestling. We've got a ton more about Steve Maclin, he's going by now. We've got a ton more about Steve Maclin in Impact Wrestling, his possible opponents, details of his contract, all that kind of stuff later on in the video. But it was also brought up during this interview that Wesley Blake did with Sportskeeda about the possibility of working with Steve Maclin in Impact Wrestling. And he had some interesting comments about this. He said, quote, the great thing about these opportunities now is that you have Steve Maclin, formerly known as Steve Cutler. He's over at Impact. That's another thing I'd like to do. I think me and him have a lot of unfinished business of still being a tag team together. So he's certainly not ruling out the possibility of working with Steve Maclin again in the future. Now, again, we have some more information about Steve Maclin that I'm going to move on to in a second. But when it comes to Wesley Blake, I mean, when we spoke about and when we covered the story about Wesley Blake getting released by WWE, of course, he was part of the April batch of people released from their contracts. When I spoke about companies that Wesley Blake could go to, I think Impact Wrestling is right up there for him. I really do. I don't see him going to AEW. No disrespect, but I don't think his star is really big enough that it warrants going to AEW. You have to look at the names that AEW have, unfortunately. That roster, even for a company that has, you know, Dark Elevation on a Monday, AEW Dark on a Tuesday, Dynamite on a Wednesday, and coming up AEW Rampage on a Friday, that's still a really, really big roster. It's a bloated roster. Some would say it's maybe too big, and they do certainly have an over-reliance on keeping talent as opposed to shipping them out. They certainly want to be seen as an opposite to WWE in that vein. But if Wesley Blake signed with AEW, I genuinely don't see where he would go. He'd hardly be appearing on Dynamite, put it that way. You know, he would be a guy that maybe does appear on AEW Dark Elevation, AEW Dark, but is that really something he wants to do? Does he want to go from WWE to where he would have been appearing on SmackDown and was appearing, I guess, infrequently on NXT, or certainly was appearing frequently as part of the Forgotten Sons faction, tag team with Jackson Riker and Steve Cutler? Would he want to go from that to appearing maybe on Dark Elevation or maybe AEW Dark, or would he rather go to somewhere like Impact Wrestling, where he said he spoke about it, you know, me and Steve Maclin have unfinished business. We never got to be that tag team on a really big stage. Yes, we were the Forgotten Sons in NXT. Yes, we were featured on the brand during that period of time, but twice, 2 instances in a row, they get called up to the main roster to compete as a tag team, and it doesn't work out. Of course, the first time the Forgotten Sons are called up to SmackDown, that's the premier show in WWE right now. That's the A show. That's certainly the show that has the most people watching it. It has the biggest audience. It's on network television. It's on Fox. It's a massive opportunity. Again, myself personally, I never really latched on to the Forgotten Sons gimmick. It wasn't really for me, but it was a huge opportunity for them, and who knows, if you can make it work, you can make it work. Yes, it was during the pandemic. pandemic. Yes, it was during the Performance Center era of SmackDown and WWE for that matter, where they were having those empty shows, or the shows in the Performance Center with some NXT Performance Center recruits surrounding the ring, but they could have had an opportunity. It was a foot in the door. And what happens? Jackson Riker, of course, does that tweet about the former president, and suddenly no one wants to work with him. And so no one certainly doesn't want to work with Jackson Riker. I don't know if there was any heat that much on Wesley Blake or Steve Cutler, but I just guess it was just guilty by association, right? And suddenly nobody wants to work with the Forgotten Sons, and then they have to drop the gimmick from television. Eventually they come back, Steve Cutler and Wesley Blake. They're the Knights of the Lone Wolf with King Corbin on SmackDown. The idea was to have King Corbin's faction feuding with the Mysterio family, which would have been, ironically, Buddy Murphy, Rey Mysterio, Dominic Mysterio, but Steve Maclin contracted COVID. Vince McMahon threw a hissy fit because of this, and he fired Steve Maclin. Because of that, the Knights of the Lone Wolf gimmick is dropped. So you feel for Wesley Blake. You do feel for him, because twice in a row, he got dropped from WWE television, main roster television, for something that he didn't do. He wasn't the guy that did the tweet. He wasn't Steve Maclin, and he didn't contract COVID. I still don't think that's very fair to fire someone in a pandemic for contracting COVID, especially when you've got people on the payroll, certainly on the developmental brand, people like maybe, I don't know, Drake Wirtz, who are actively discouraging the whole pandemic and, being just crazy about the whole thing. It felt very unfair, and I feel for the guy. So I really do hope that he gets an opportunity to prove himself. I hope he gets an opportunity to land in a company where he can be featured, where he can prove a lot of people wrong. Do I see him teaming up with Buddy Murphy? I think a Steve Maclin reunion is more likely. I could see Wesley Blake coming in and doing a couple of shots with Buddy Murphy, say, on the indie scene. The indie scene is opening back up as we get towards the end of the tunnel when it comes to the pandemic, certainly with light at the end of the tunnel. I could certainly see a situation where a promoter wants to do a tag team match, and it's Buddy Murphy and Wesley Blake. They reunite their NXT tag team and they do a match, an occasional one-off match. I could see that. As far as for me, Buddy Murphy, he can go to an AEW and be featured on television. He can go to an Impact Wrestling and be the X Division champion, the world champion, whatever championship he wants, frankly. He can go to Ring of Honor and be their ROH champion. He can go to NWA and even be the NWA World Heavyweight champion. He can go to MLW. He can go anywhere he wants. He is a prize commodity. He's certainly a name that I think a lot of people will be very, very interested in. And I think Buddy Murphy will do very well on the independent scene. Lord knows a lot of promoters are already very interested in bringing him in. So I could see Wesley Blake and Buddy Murphy reuniting as a one-off on an indie show or wherever Buddy Murphy lands. Maybe if it is an Impact Wrestling, they could do a one-off. But as far as something, more frequent than that, I don't see that. I think Buddy Murphy's money is as a single star. As far as coming into Impact and being a tag team with Steve Maclin, whilst at the moment, of course, Steve Maclin's doing his own thing, I wouldn't rule it out. I think Impact Wrestling, they at one period of time had a really strong tag team division last year. Not that it isn't strong now, but certainly they lost some big tag teams. It was the Motor City Machine Guns, the North, all aren't competing right now. That's difficult. Heath and Rhino. Heath's out with an injury. Rhino's with Violent by Design. He's one half of the tag team champions, but there's certainly names that they previously once had that they don't anymore. And I think having someone like Steve Maclin and Wesley Blake would be very beneficial to Impact Wrestling. It just depends, I suppose, as to what their plans are with Steve Maclin going forward. Who knows? Who knows what that's going to be? Again, I still think a likely destination for him to land is Impact. I wouldn't be surprised if he's one of the names to show up at Slammiversary. Of course, his 90-day non-compete clause expires right before Slammiversary, so I wouldn't be surprised. Look, Wesley Blake going to Impact Wrestling, is it going to make a ton of headlines? Probably not. It's not the showbiz name. It's not the super, super exciting name. But in the same vein as someone like Steve Maclin, it's a name to say, look, maybe I didn't get the opportunity that I should have got or I thought I was going to get in WWE. I can go to Impact. They're going to give me an opportunity to prove myself. They're going to give me an opportunity to get over, to do a different character, or to show everyone, look, WWE made a mistake. And it's the same vein as it was last year, in that these people that are coming into Impact Wrestling from WWE, they've got a big chip on their shoulder, a real big chip on their shoulder, and that's not a bad thing at all. They've possibly been on the sidelines for a while, certainly having the non-compete clause, but they've been on the sidelines for a while, and they want to prove to everyone, look, WWE made a mistake. They shouldn't have let me go, or prior to that, they should have been using me, and I'm going to prove you all wrong. They're going to be desperate to have me back, and I'm not going to go back because I'm going to prove them wrong. There's plenty of people on that Impact roster that applies to right now. A great example is Deonna Purrazzo. They let her go. She's one of the best female performers in the world right now. In the world. Bar none. They would kill to have someone like Deonna Purrazzo back in that company. I don't think she wants to go back. I think she's very, very happy where she is and doing what she's doing right now and getting the praise and getting the adulation for doing so. So I think Wesley Blake, him coming into Impact would be a good fit. But again, I could also see him going into other companies, as I mentioned, like Ring of Honor, like MLW, like the NWA. There are options for him. As far as a reunion with Buddy Murphy, I could see it on the Indies. As far as a reunion with Steve Maclin in Impact Wrestling, I do think that is a possibility. I do think that's a possibility. Now, speaking of Steve Maclin, he recently did an interview with Alex McCarthy of TalkSport and revealed a ton of really interesting information about his Impact Wrestling contract, his character, the creative process in Impact Wrestling. I think all of this is fascinating. So he was asked about his character in Impact Wrestling. Now, if you've watched any of the videos that I've done talking about Impact Wrestling or talking about Steve Maclin, you will know that I said it just screams the Punisher. It screams the Punisher. As a fan of Marvel Comics, as a fan of the MCU or Marvel Netflix television series, fan of the Punisher. I've got a ton of the graphic novels here. The Grant Ennis run. I love that run of the Punisher. I'm a big fan of the Punisher. As soon as I saw it, I went, they're doing the Punisher. You know, you can look at the Macklin logo. It's very close to the Punisher logo. So close that you kind of be like, you're walking a fine line, because those Disney suits might start calling Impact Wrestling, going, hey, wait a minute, that looks a bit like the Punisher to me. And he's pretty much confirmed that it's a play on the Punisher. He said, quote, my character is pretty much me. I'm getting my point across, but it's also a contrast of taking the Punisher and Captain America and moving it all into one. It's not so much making it the Patriot, but more of the darker side of everything and crossing that line that many people never want to talk about or go into. So now I get to play on that side of the tracks where I was told no for so long. So he's pretty much confirmed what I was saying before, that it's a play on the Punisher. Now, again, it depends which run of the Punisher you read, but certainly the more modern takes of the Punisher have been that it's always that he's a soldier, but he's a soldier in somewhere like Iraq or Afghanistan, goes through some crazy stuff back there being a Marine, comes back with Special Forces, comes back and is constantly in trauma, he's kind of the anti-hero in the sense that most superheroes, like, your Batmans, have a line that they won't cross. The Punisher doesn't care. The Punisher will cross that line, and he's all about removing injustice and criminality in whatever city he's in, mostly New York, and that involves, taking down and getting rid of mobsters and the underworld and all that kind of stuff, and certainly that stems a lot from losing his family. But he doesn't care about crossing that line. He'll actively, kill people, essentially. And some of the Marvel characters in that universe kind of look at Punisher as a criminal himself, because that's not the right way to do things. And maybe that's the character that Steve Maclin's going to go in. Again, aesthetically, for me, straight away I went, that's the Punisher. But in terms of what he's going to do as a wrestler, and what storylines he's going to be involved in, it's going to be interesting. Again, if he's going to be truly the Punisher, he's going to be looking at injustices in Impact Wrestling, and he's not going to care if they're a good guy, if they're a bad guy, or about crossing lines. It's all about injustice, and that kind of grey character is something that's difficult to pull off, I think, but it's going to be interesting. It's going to be fascinating. Now, he was also asked about working with Impact creatively, and this was interesting. He said, quote, it's been awesome. The day after I got released, I went with Deonna Purrazzo to Nashville just to get away. Just to go and be around wrestling again and get away from Orlando. They brought me to TV, but I wasn't there to do much except hang around the boys. It was funny to sit with D'Lo Brown and Tommy Dreamer and just talk. We didn't even talk business. Obviously, a little bit about what happened, but it was more life. And I just got across who I am, for them to accept me in for who I am and what I want to produce. And I think that's what Impact is now. It's one of those companies which is going to allow you to grow on your own. They're going to let you have your input, but everyone is giving you the tools. It's not one of those things where one person is telling you one thing and someone else is telling you another. It's not like, F you, do this, if you do this idea, as far as F you, it's a misprint, no swearing. It's not like, if you do this person's idea and not mine, you'll get heat kind of thing. It reminds me of early NXT days where you just try and get your character across and get your personality into it as much as you can. Scott D'Amore, Jimmy Jacobs, Tommy, D'Lo, everyone has been so great across the board and making sure I get what I want to be portrayed as. And even talking habits with promos, Jimmy Jacobs sat me down and said so much that resonated with me. I think it's great. I think the Jimmy Jacobs returning to Impact, or Jimmy Jacobs really being influential behind the scene, a lot of people have been saying that. A lot of people have been saying that. You look at so many interviews, you'll see what really a creative genius, and I know that's big words, but it is true, Jimmy Jacobs is. Jimmy Jacobs, I mean, he's a guy that Chris Jericho openly says the reason that Chris Jericho, that 2016, 2017 character in WWE, The List and It and Stupid Idiot and all that kind of stuff, the reason that guy got so popular and so over, that's Jimmy Jacobs. And that shows you the creative, again, genius that this guy is. So to have him in Impact Wrestling is it really is such a So it really is such an asset for Impact Wrestling. It really, really is. It really is. Now, he spoke about his deal with Impact Wrestling as well, which is interesting. Steve Maclin said this, quote, I am signed with Impact Wrestling. Other than that, I'm not going to say anything else because that's my business. But I am officially with Impact for the long term right now, and I'm very excited. There's a lot of good talent in Impact, and I don't think everybody realizes what Impact has. So he has confirmed he's officially signed a contract, which we knew. Again, if you followed the channel, we spoke about that before. We spoke about how D'Lo Brown, and it was an interview that Steve Maclin actually did with Tommy Dreamer, where he outlined that process. That actually D'Lo Brown offered Steve Maclin a contract 24 hours before he was even allowed to sign something. He was offered a contract 24 hours before his 90-day non-compete clause even came up. So he is signed with Impact Wrestling. He signed for the long term. What they mean by the long term, I don't know. Long term in Impact Wrestling talk usually is 2 years. I doubt it's completely exclusive. I would be under the assumption, in the vein of most Impact Wrestling deals, that it's not an exclusive thing. They can work indie dates. They can even work dates with possibly, New Japan or even AEW. Certainly indie shows like Warrior Wrestling and all that kind of stuff. I would assume that would be the case with Steve Maclin as well. So he's confirmed he's officially signed, and he's signed to Impact Wrestling for the long term, which is interesting. Of course, we don't know money or anything like that, but necessarily most of the time, it's almost uncomfortable, isn't it, to talk about money and that kind of stuff, unless it's out there in a public domain. Put it this way, if I did an interview with Steve Maclin, I wouldn't say how much you're making. I don't think that's fair. Now, he was also asked about opponents. Which opponents would he like to face the most? And I think this is really interesting because this might give us an indication as to where Steve Maclin, the character, is going to go in the future. Now, on who he wants to face the most, he said, quote, the X division in general, I'm excited for what the future holds across the board. Josh Alexander is my number one right now. I want him the most. Him and TJP killed the Iron Man match. I got nothing but praise for them, but I'm looking forward to getting in the ring with both of them. Josh is my number one right now because he is the X division champion. So it shows really where Steve Maclin is going to be performing in Impact Wrestling. He's open to the X Division. He wants to compete in the X Division, which says a lot about the reputation of the X Division right now. It says a lot about Josh Alexander, his reputation in Impact Wrestling, and just wider in pro wrestling right now. I know I sound like a broken record right now, but it is true. It's totally true that Impact Wrestling wants to elevate the X Division. They want to get that X Division championship over. They want to get the X Division over. They want to get the X Division to a point where the ECW television championship was in the late 90s, early 2000s. I know I've said that a million times here on the channel, but it's true. That's what they want to do. They want it to be that you can go for the World Championship or you can go for the X Division Championship. Essentially, you've got two World Championships. You've got two World Champions. And I think that's fascinating that Steve Maclin would come in and you would think, the end game or the end goal would to become the Impact World Champion, right? That would be the aim. I want to come in, I want to be the Impact World Champion. But that's not the case. That's not the case for Steve Maclin. He wants to come in and he wants to go after the X Division Championship because he realizes that's where the big matches are happening right now. That's where the most critically acclaimed matches are happening right now. Whether it's, the Iron Man match with Josh Alexander, TJP, whether it's Ultimate X at Slammiversary, he wants to go after the X Division Championship. Now, we know the stars that have been confirmed for Ultimate X at Slammiversary. I'm assuming Steve Maclin's not going to be added into that match. I don't know what the plans are for Steve Maclin at Slammiversary, but it looks like coming out of Slammiversary, the challenger for that X Division Championship is going to be Steve Maclin. And that's very interesting. That's fascinating. So I'm very excited to see what Steve Maclin could do, his style in that X Division, because that's what the X Division is all about. Contrasting styles, different kinds of matchups, styles to make matches. It's not about high-flying styles. It's not a cruiserweight division. It's in every kind of division. It's not about weight limits. It's about no limits. It's about having, yes, high-fly style, but also lucha libre style, also mat wrestling, also European style, British style, strong style, whatever style of wrestling you want. It's about a hybrid of styles. It's about having the best match on the show. So I think that's fascinating that Steve Maclin has openly said, no, it's the X Division Championship I want. Not the Impact World Championship. Hasn't even mentioned it. I want to go after the X Division Championship. I want to go after the X Division title. I think that's fascinating. It really is. Now let's move on and talk about W. Morrissey, because since W. Morrissey's come into Impact Wrestling, a lot of people have spoken because W. Morrissey, Big Cass, as he's known as in WWE, does it mean that Enzo Amore is going to come into Impact Wrestling? A lot of people are rolling their eyes hearing this and go, no, please, no. We don't want to see that. Of course, Enzo and Big Cass, they were a tag team in WWE, tag team outside of WWE as well. Now, he was on the That's 90s Wrestling podcast recently, and he was asked, are you going to reunite with Enzo Amore sometime down the line? Now, this is what he had to say, quote, I have no idea. I don't know where he's at. He's got music he's focused on. He's got wrestling, acting. There's a lot of things in entertainment that he has his eye on. So I don't know what he's 100% focused on right now. But right now in Impact, I'm here as a singles, and I'm looking to make a name for myself on my own. Now, he was also asked, which was quite interesting, he was also asked about possibly doing a tour with New Japan Pro Wrestling in Japan. He said 100%, I can't even go into detail on that. The answer would be just blinding, big, bold letters and numbers. 100%, that's the answer to that question, yes. So I wouldn't be surprised if in the very, very near future, Big Cass, W. Morrissey is going to work for New Japan. Certainly, he looks very, very interested in doing that. As far as Enzo in Impact Wrestling, I like the presentation of W. Morrissey. W. Morrissey is being pushed to the moon right now in Impact Wrestling. He's being pushed as the big, dominant, arguably one of the biggest heels in the company, outside of people like Kenny Omega. He's being pushed as one of the biggest up-and-coming heels. And I just don't think he needs Enzo. I mean, Enzo can try and be serious and all that kind of stuff, but given his shtick, given the way he talks on the microphone, given the way he works, he's a character. He's a personality, and it does come across most of the time as comedic. I know he tries to be serious, but W. Morrissey is anything but comedic right now. He's anything but comedic. And I look at that and I say he doesn't need it. He doesn't need Enzo. He doesn't. He is fine on his own. He doesn't need to do a reunion. Maybe sometime down the line in Impact. It depends how long he's there for. But, I mean, that would be way, way, way down the line after W. Morrissey has had maybe World Championship opportunities, maybe even a World Championship run, maybe even goes into the X Division, right? I said it's about all kind of styles, but I just don't think Enzo, at the moment, I have no desire at all to see him in Impact. The only reason I could see Impact doing it is just for name recognition, just to try and get people's buzz on social media, just to try and get people talking about Impact. But they don't need to do that. They really don't need to do that. They're getting enough buzz anyway on social media. They've got the AEW working relationship. They've got Slammiversary coming up. They've got the other former WWE stars showing up. I don't think Enzo is needed right now in Impact Wrestling, and that's no disrespect to him. I just don't think that would be the right move for Impact Wrestling going forward at the moment. Finally, we were speaking about Steve Maclin earlier. Let's talk about Deonna Purrazzo, because WWE Hall of Famer Alundra Blaze has recently lavished praise on Impact Wrestling's Knockouts champion Deonna Purrazzo. Now, Purrazzo's run over the past year in Impact Wrestling has received widespread acclaim, with many calling her the best female champion in the business right now and one of the best female workers in the world right now, myself included. She's absolutely just on fire. She's absolutely tremendous. Now, since being released by WWE in April 2020, Deonna Purrazzo has time and time again proved the global juggernaut failed to recognize her as a potential star and future women's champion. Now, responding to a video that was posted on the Impact Wrestling Twitter handle, in which Purrazzo speaks about the promotion's thriving Knockouts division, Blaze listed Purrazzo as among her favorites. This is what Medusa/Alundra Blaze had to say, quote, "Wow, this is absolutely amazing and beautiful. I'm so proud of you, Deonna Purrazzo. You have been one of my favorites. Don't know if it's the bond of Italian names. However, I think it's most of all, it's the respect I have for all women that work the entire platform." And Impact Wrestling star was quick to acknowledge Alundra Blaze's message, thanking her for always being on her side and believing in her. She said, quote, "Thanks for always being on my side and believing in me." And in fact, Deonna Purrazzo even recently tweeted a match against Alundra Blaze in Impact Wrestling. I don't think that's going to happen. But the praise that Deonna Purrazzo gets at the moment and has been getting for the last 12 months is beyond deserved. Again, I mentioned earlier, she is one of, if not the best female worker in the world right now. I hold her up that high. When you can talk about people like Sasha Banks, like Bayley, like Charlotte Flair, like whoever, Deonna Purrazzo is right up there in that conversation. She's just been that good. And you look at WWE and you look at Triple H and his recent comments, right? All the best female performers in the world work in WWE, or they certainly want to work here. You had Deonna Purrazzo. She's one of the best in the world right now, and I don't think she wants to work in WWE, and she certainly doesn't. She works for Impact at the moment. So I think Deonna Purrazzo would disagree with Triple H on that comment. Certainly interesting. But look, guys, as always, this is just one man's opinion. What are your thoughts on all of these Impact Wrestling news stories we've spoken about today? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I'll do my best to respond and reply to all of your comments. Really enjoy interacting with you guys, talking about Impact Wrestling, WWE, AEW, New Japan Pro Wrestling, all things pro wrestling here on the channel. So be sure to get involved with the community. Drop a comment below. All opinions are welcome. If you have enjoyed this video, please do smash a like on the like button too. Really does help us out here on YouTube. Got the rankings and get into people's recommendation feeds if they haven't seen our videos previously. But most importantly, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to Wrestle News 365. You can do that by clicking the bottom right corner of the screen right now, or if you wait a few seconds, there'll be a subscribe button at the end of this video along with another video for you to watch. Thank you very much for watching, listening, streaming, or having come across this video today, and I'll speak to you again very, very soon. Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.